Jane Betts, thanks for
Right.
joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I'm really excited. Okay, so to start, I'd love to before I kick off, let's introduce Jane Betts. So Jane Betts, head of people and transformation, or people and reputation
Yep.
for Aussie Broadband.
Yep.
Which we'll dive into Aussie in a moment because fast-growing business, but also I'm really excited about having you here because you've worked in some of Australia's biggest brands. You also have, I feel, a very interesting personal story as well, by way of your interests, which we both share. But Jane, give us, before we jump into Jane the professional, let's talk about Jane the person. Tell us about how you got into becoming head of people and reputation for Aussie. But before that, tell us about Jane, the person, not the professional.
So we moved around a lot in New Zealand. So I had to become a person who could really adapt to new environments, make friends really easily, and which suited my natural extroversion. I moved around New Zealand. I was originally born in Auckland, then went to a very small place called Gisborne, spent a bit of time in Wellington, and did my high schooling years in Hamilton, and thought then that I might like to be an accountant. Not really understanding at all what an accountant could be, and also not really understanding perhaps some of the contrast between my extroversion and what certainly in your early careers accountants do, which is spend a lot of time not necessarily talking to people.
No.
So after a year of doing accountancy, I decided to go and get my first big job, and I landed, fortunately, in a bank, which is a really good career move when you're 100 years old like I am, because many years ago you could develop a really good long career in the bank, and I ended up in their marketing department. So I was doing sort of a sales promotion marketing style of role, and then became a sales trainer, and I kind of fell into HR through that because I obviously loved standing up and doing things in front of people. And so the training start for me was the start to my career. And then I became a regional training and performance manager. I was terribly young. Like, I was out there talking to crusty old bank managers about how to improve performance and training in their banks.
You're right.
And I must have looked to them like I was about 12, but clearly the bank had seen something in me, and I was able to start my career that way. But I did feel like a bit of a phony.
Right.
So I then took a foray actually into becoming a banker, which my dad was. And I remember probably one of the most incredibly proud moments for me was when I became a bank manager, and I opened up a branch of the bank for ASW Bank at the time, and my dad got to come to the opening and see his daughter carrying on the mantle of being a bank manager. So
love that.
Yeah, so I've always come out, gone and done a bit of operations, and then moved back into the people space. I went from being a trainer into being more of a generalist, and then grew my career from there.
One thing with banks is there's always lots of transformation going on.
Yeah.
And particularly in the last 10 to 15 years, I feel like. I'd imagine that would have been a pretty incredible experience by way of what you've learned at that time. Is that a fair assessment?
I think there's banks and there's banks. So I was really fortunate to join a bank called ASW Bank in New Zealand, and they were very innovative, and they were really technology-led, which in the 90s was probably a little less than what you would have seen now. They were also on a national expansion. So their transformation was about growing through technology and also growing their footprint at a time when banks were still opening up offices rather than closing them down.
Yeah.
So part of what we were doing when I was actually in the people team was we were actually recruiting people, bringing them on board. And I spent a bit of time in their transformation team actually on the open-ups and taking people out of Westpacs and ANZs and BNZs and things like that and saying, okay, this is what it means to be an ASVer. And that was quite revolutionary for me because it taught me a lot about the difference between one organisation doing banking and another organisation is actually culture.
Yeah.
It's not systems and processes. Yeah, sure, you need to learn that sort of thing. It's the culture that you really need to focus on, and what is the ethos of the brand, and how do you immerse people into that so that they are indoctrinated and present that out to the world. Because if you're going into a new area, you're not only trying to do it the way that we do it, but you're also trying to win people over with the brand and what we can do that's different than every other bank. So it was really interesting.
That's interesting. Where, in your mind, where do businesses get that wrong?
Well, I think when you're trying to do something at scale, which large banks are, and we can talk about transformation in large banks because I've been in those as well, you're heavily reliant on leaders to lead the culture. You can't wrap your arms around the people. You're not small enough to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes organisations don't spend enough time thinking about how are they making sure that their leaders are culture carriers and bringing them on board and on the journey for them, right? And I talk about, particularly in having worked in 2 of the big banks in Australia, in most of the larger organisations, there's a layer of permafrost, and it's really hard to get messages down through that permafrost.
Right.
And it's really hard for leaders who are above the permafrost to hear what the messages are that they need to hear. So that's where some of that culture miss can happen, because there's really good plans, really good intentions, but the ability to execute those is heavily reliant on your frontline leadership capability.
Gee, I've got about 100 questions following up to that. And so I guess one of the things, Jane, that we see, when businesses are building international teams particularly, is that there is a nervousness around change, around people, and that integration piece. What advice or lessons have you garnered over the years of your experience to ensure that works well? I mean, what are the lessons?
I think in any situation, whether it's international, integrating new businesses, whatever it is, it's really understand what are the important parts of your culture that are not negotiable no matter where a person sits, whether they sit in the Philippines or they sit in Sydney and you're a Melbourne-based organisation. What are the not negotiable things? Because microcultures will always exist, right? And if I talk about my experience with our international employees, they're actually some of our most engaged employees, right? And a lot of that's to do with some of the microculture that you support us with when you actually have them as part of your team. But there are some things that you should never accept microculture on, and that's things like your values, the way that work gets done and how people are led, and basically the way that the customers are treated. And so if you get leaders understanding that, but also if you support leaders to understand and see the people that they're now being asked to lead and be able to nuance their leadership towards that, I think that's where that you would get it right. And if you don't do that, you'll get it wrong.
When we caught up before Christmas, something that really resonated with that you mentioned was, small businesses, big businesses, we're all facing the same kind of challenges, right? And I appreciate that in big businesses, to steal your terminology, the permafrost, tends to be a little bit more rigid and harder to break through given the sheer size of businesses. I guess when I look at that, I'm always wondering for a business to be able to convey their microculture, getting across there. Is that something that you think can be done easily remotely, or do you think that's something that has to be done in person? How do you guys deliver that in practice?
I think it has to be done deliberately.
Right.
And so there are natural people that will all be able to do that. So I've got, for example, one leader who lives in Perth, and he has a bigger presence on screen than many leaders have in person.
Wow.
Right. But not all leaders are lucky enough to be able to be like that or to do that or to actually have the skill to do that. And I think if you are not in person, you need to create deliberateness around how you manage that relationship. And I think also, having had my first experience going to the Philippines and meeting people, there is a heck of a lot of value of investing some time and actually going and seeing your people and bringing them together, even if it's not as frequently as you might see your onshore team.
I want to change gears for a second. Again, when we were chatting, one of the things I love, you are, without doubt, the most frequent concert goer I've ever met.
I've got one tonight.
Have you?
Yes, I do.
I'm not surprised. But something I've also recently learned about you is one of your daily habits.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, exercise is a daily habit, and more often than not, that have it would be in the Port Phillip Bay in Melbourne, which for those of you that don't know, the Port Phillip Bay is a beautiful place to go and swim. It's actually a really interesting ecosystem. It's also quite cold.
It's not quite cold. It's more than quite cold. I remember, and why I'm stunned that you're doing this without a wetsuit.
Yeah.
You're doing this without a wetsuit. You're doing it all year round, and I can only recall. I have a memory of doing recovery sessions in Elwood and Sandringham in the middle of winter, and we had to swim out to the buoy and back twice.
Yeah, okay.
And that was enough, right? So that was, July type stuff, grown men, shedding tears about the fact they had to swim out to a buoy and back. Ice cream headache type cold type stuff. You're doing this every day for fun.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
Well, actually, I'd say I do it every day for more than fun. Obviously getting into cold water is not fun, right? But what happens after you break through that is the magic. And I wouldn't necessarily call it fun. I would actually call it therapy.
Yeah.
So there's a big, body of research. Wim Hof, everybody knows what that is, about breath work and all of those sorts of things. But I have a big job, and I have, a child who has some mental health challenges, and so I have to be very good at being able to compartmentalize. And swimming is the only exercise I've ever done in the bay, not necessarily in the pool, because pool's different sort of atmosphere. Going out in the bay is the only place that I go where I totally am outside of my head. You're not in your head. You're not thinking about it. And the cold water therapy is extraordinarily good for mental health. It's very good for physical health. It's also very good for inflammation. Lots of people who go through health crises will often start to become cold water swimmers and talk about the therapeutic value. So for me, it's a case of it's a fantastic way of exercising as well as a great way of clearing your head.
Mental circuit breaker. Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's the original ice bath.
Yes, it is definitely the original ice bath. And I'm I talk about people who go and dip, so there's a lot of dippers. And the theory is that you need to probably be in for about 10 minutes or more to get real value. And there's a whole lot of things that you need to learn to be able to swim out there properly and not get hypothermia. I'm quite fortunate that I don't feel the cold, and I never recall ever in my life having shivered. So maybe that's part of my craziness.
Oh, it definitely is. Is it, because if I'm not mistaken, it's the polar bears? Is there a polar bears group?
No, there's the Brighton icebergers.
Right.
So there's all sorts of groups around the bay, and I've got a friend who is chronicling the bay swimming groups, because you'd be surprised, there's actually hundreds of them.
Wow.
And he rides around on a bike and finds all the different swimming groups and chronicles them, and he's got some great clips. I can send you one at some stage. So we're called the Sandy Salties.
Right.
The Brighton icebergers are the ones that are quite well known. There's the Hampton Hamburgers. There's the Mount Martha Seawolves.
Love it.
There's the Willow Jellies. And so there's groups everywhere. The Seawolves, their signature tune is they go into the water and howl. We don't do that. We do howl sometimes, but not deliberately. So cackle's more the thing that I do.
So I'm in the Shire in Cronulla, and there's a group there, a bunch of guys that go every morning, called the Cronulla Gropers. Mm-hmm. Not the best, not the best name, but there is a famous groper around there, a blue groper that is kind of named after, I guess. And so I often see those guys out there before the sun comes up, being shark bait. And they love it. They love it. And you have a coffee afterwards and get on with life. And it's fantastic. So I didn't know that about you, Jane. And having done the Melbourne winters, tip of the hat to you, because it is, for anyone who hasn't swum in the Port Phillip Bay in the middle of winter, it's a different kind of cold.
Yeah, about the lowest I've been would be about 8.6 degrees.
That's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's enough. On a personal level again, how many concerts are you going to a year? Just to give people a context of...
Look, it would be probably somewhere around 30 to 35 concerts at least a year. So some weekends I'll do 2, but on average it's at least one a fortnight, if not one a week.
Now, I wanted to touch on something because, and we share some love for similar types of bands and music, but one of the things that you mentioned earlier before we jumped on was a methodology, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
Can you explain that to me? I loved it.
My 1 for 12. So I think what I said to you was that I've always been a bit sort of goal adventure driven and family driven, but I heard someone explain this really lovely theory, and it was basically that if you start the year and set yourself one big goal for the year that you have to actually work for.
Yep.
You do 4 adventures. That could be a holiday, it could be a hike or whatever it is. You don't necessarily have to train for that. You don't train for a holiday unless you're going on a serious drinking binge or something like that. And then 12 family moments. And if you actually do that for a long period of time, let's say you started when you're 40, and I didn't start when I'm 40, but that you would have, 40 goals, you would have 160 adventures and 480 family moments that you could look back on. And they're deliberate moments, right, where my kids are older now, so getting them together is harder.
Of course.
So making a deliberate moment of bringing them together and having a moment with them is really important.
I love that. It is, and it's I think for goal-orientated people who break things down to chunks, being able to work backwards from that, is pretty powerful. So I'm going to implement that. I like it. Hey, I want to sort of talk back on business for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about AUSSIE, fast-growing business.
Yep.
And it's also an industry, to steal your words, an industry that perhaps by way of some other brands, has also got a hard job in establishing trust in consumers.
Yes.
How are you managing through that? How do you do that through as you are scaling at the pace in which AUSSIE is, whilst also maintaining reputation?
Yeah.
That's not an easy thing. How are you doing it?
It's hard. Reputation is hard won and easily lost. And I am the Chief People and Reputation Officer, so I'm very concerned about that.
Yep.
I mean, the story of AUSSIE is we're a 21, nearly 22-year-old company, and we were founded in the Valley, so the Latrobe Valley down in Gippsland, by 2 guys in Morwell, and I think it was one of the founders' mother's lounge room, and the story goes from there. And basically, what they were kind of tech nerds who wanted better internet. Right. And so they kind of decided that everybody wanted better internet, and particularly in regional Victoria when it was all dial-up, it was not that great. So they did lots of work on that. And then, of course, as we started to go into NBN, the opportunities and the government subsidies started to come in, and they were able to fly through. And really, we had our straps sort of in 2016 and through COVID, where the internet became everything.
Absolutely.
Speed became everything, and trust and reliability became everything. We were really, really well positioned at that time to be able to deliver on a proposition. We had, we guaranteed that we wouldn't overload basically points of connection, because what people would do is they would claim speeds, but they would overload the points of connection so that those speeds could never be delivered.
Right.
And we guaranteed that once we got to the point where we were getting to overselling on a particular connection point, that we would stop advertising in those areas so that we wouldn't be actually claiming something that we couldn't do. And that was very much about the founder. He's a very trust and integrity based.
Yeah, I was going to say integrity.
Person.
Yeah.
And he would often make really hard decisions that might not necessarily be the most commercial decisions, but they were the ones that were in the best interest of their customer. And I think the foundation values, which then did transpose into values. So we've got 5 sets of values, and they were developed by my predecessor. And I call those the best gift that Janet could ever have given me, because the values are amazing and they are quite embedded in the organisation. Those 5 values, plus that sort of history lesson of the fact that trust is so important to us, is the way that we're trying to move the organisation at scale and keep that integrity and that trust intact.
Yeah, right. It's, particularly the last few years, the growth you guys have gone on is incredible.
Yes.
I'm interested in understanding, as someone who heads up people and reputation, the influence of technology, AI, all of those things, where, people are getting perhaps frustrated with AI, want to speak to a real person, reputations obviously get tarnished. Where are you seeing businesses get it wrong? And what's your advice there? Do you have any takeaways that people can use or, leverage?
Well, I think we're moving relatively cautiously into those spheres because our entire reputation for Aussie has been built on our customer proposition and trust,
Yep.
and the fact that we have an outstanding. We don't tell our people to end calls within a certain time frame. We don't script them. We tell them their job is to solve the customer's problems, right? So for us to move into AI, we have to make sure that what we are doing in AI remains in the customer's best interests, right?
Yep.
And for some customers, they will love it, right? They will love chatting. They don't want to talk on the phone.
Yep.
They want to do that. So how do you create an extraordinary chat experience for customers?
Yep.
Using human and AI, whatever is right. Because sometimes, I find, you probably had this as well. You start a chat and within a minute, that AI chat can't do anything for you, right?
All the time.
And then you end up falling into a wait queue for a human and you can tell that they're answering 4 or 5 different ones. So, which is fine. I mean,
I was literally on a web chat before you joined with an airline and I cracked it and it got off it.
Yeah. So your chat experience needs to be a good one too, right?
Yep.
So, you can't overload your chat crew. Like there's a certain amount of simultaneous chats that work and a certain amount of simultaneous chats that don't.
Yep.
So I think what you've got to do is every time you don't design an AI experience, you design a customer experience.
Totally.
And then you're working out whether that's delivered through a human, whether it's delivered through AI, and what's the best outcome for that. And then if that position gets to a point where the AI experience is no longer going to be able to solve the customer problem and the customer needs to opt into a human to sort things out, that experience is a transition-free one as well, right?
Having worked across large enterprises, throughout your career, and you've worked across some really big businesses, and in those businesses, they've had global operations.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, where do businesses succeed in building international teams? So which businesses do it well and why, in your mind?
Well, the first thing is, I think, we were lucky enough to engage with an international workforce through the acquisition of Symbio, which is a company that we acquired a few years ago. And the thing that I admire greatly about what was done with the Symbio experience on international was that they worked really hard to make the team part of the team.
Yep.
Rather than it's an outsourced workforce that do a job for us. And I think when you have a team that is integrated and genuinely feels part of the overall business, then I think that's the first step to it. Also, working hard to make sure managers understand how to manage the nuances of an augmented team with an outsourced workforce.
Yep.
And then I think you've got to get the right provider with the right training, with the right skill level in your call centre, if it might be, or in your operations. And my biggest frustration, and you can tell when you ring an international call centre, where you've got some people who are heavily scripted for 20% or maybe even 60 or 80% of what normally happens. And as soon as it goes off that, that's when the experience becomes poor and there isn't a recovery mechanism from that. And so you've got to make sure that the customer experience is fully designed across whether it's your onshore workforce or your offshore workforce, and it's seamless.
I was going to ask you, if you were advising a business today who perhaps was about to embark on building international teams, what lessons would you, or what advice would you give that business before they were to go down this path?
I think a lot of people outsource because their processes are broken and they want to save money.
Yep.
And I don't think that works because your processes are still broken and you're actually putting those processes further away from you, so they become harder to fix. Yes, it might be cheaper to run that workforce doing that, but you've got to really understand what is the customer experience you're delivering and what is the best and most efficient way to do that. And yes, you can do that well through an offshore resource pool, as long as you equip them with good process, with good scripting, and if you don't want the script, with good training, because they have to be able to do what they need to do. And they also need to have a point at which, when they can't resolve something, it can come back into somewhere else. Because my biggest frustration working with offshore call centres is when it gets beyond the point of what their training takes, they just basically say, I'm going to write a ticket, and you never hear back from them, right? And that's really frustrating from a customer experience point of view.
How does Jane Betts now measure success in terms of business? I mean, as the head of people and reputation, how are you now measuring success across those two very big, responsibilities?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that, we are Australia's most trusted telco, and we're very proud of that because unfortunately telecommunications ranks frequently in the bottom or the second bottom category in Australian industries, alongside, Facebook and Twitter and all of those sorts of things. So it's not a proud moment to be sitting down in that area. But we are currently 34th most trusted brand in Australia. And that is something that we pride in. And trust is measured based on an independent measure of customers saying, what brands do you trust? So that also means that they're recognised. Personally, probably one of the nicest things that I measure success by is how many times people tell me, oh, I'm a customer of Aussie. I love Aussie. And I've worked for banks, and I've worked for speed camera programs, and I've worked for accountancy companies. And I've not often had people tell me that they love the company that I'm working for. So it's incredible to have that. We also do actively measure our employee engagement. We're about to start to look to make sure that our culture is at the right point, because to your point, as you get bigger, it's harder to scale culture, and we want to make sure that we keep a close eye on what's useful and important for us to bring forward from our past, and what are the things that we need to make sure that we lose as we move forward in a bigger company. So, and then obviously there's all of the obvious financial and investor metrics that we would be taking a look at.
Yeah, right. I found, fascinating. So I think one of the other questions I'd love to know is whether it's in your, perhaps in your experience working at other big banks, what's perhaps a lesson if you could do over again, perhaps, or, that you'd like, gee, if I could get a second run at that, I'd do it this way. What's something that perhaps you wish you could have done again, but differently?
I think one of my observations, and it's not any particular bank or any particular organisation, is that we confuse organisational structure change with transformation. Right? And we're even doing some of that in this organisation, and I'm spending quite a bit of time reminding us that once the lines and boxes are drawn and people have been placed in those lines and boxes, you actually really need to think about what are the new ways of working, how are the processes different, how do they get work done in the new structure? Because I remember I was in a large organisation and we did a project, and I won't say the name of the project because it would reveal the organisation, but it was a really massive org design across the entire organisation. I was wrangling a spreadsheet of 12,000 names with old title, new title, blah, 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 blah. And, it was really an exercise in trying to extract headcount out. And so we did walk 500 people out of the business at that particular time. And then we put everyone into this new organisation structure. It was quite different. And I watched for the next 6 months people trying to work out how to do their old job in the new structure, because we hadn't attended to the fact that operating model change is not organisational structure change. It's actually, it's about the structure, it's about the processes, it's about the customer. And if you don't attend to really embedding those things, then it's a bit of a disaster for the people that are experiencing it. And then what happens, of course, is that you walk the 500 people back and that you walked out because you can't do the job because you haven't really re-engineered it. So my do-over, and something I'm still trying to make sure that we embed as we go forward, is the need to make sure that it doesn't stop at the lines and boxes, that it stops when people are doing the new work and the new ways and the new operating model.
Good advice. How hard, in your mind, has it become for heads of people and managers all over in the hybrid work? Has that created opportunity, or do you think that's created challenge?
I think it's created both.
Right.
I think good leaders will find a way to lead in a hybrid model and lead well. And, we were able to do it for a few years in Melbourne lockdown pretty hard. Poor leaders won't do it well. I think the nuance is that there is an expectation on leadership that has never been there before, right? We've got 5 generations of workers in the workforce, right? We've got hybrid working. We've got sometimes international and onshore workforces working next to each other. We're dealing with epidemic and mental health challenges and loneliness. And we are expecting a manager. When I was made a manager, it's like everyone had to come to work and do what I told them to do. And now a manager has to really become so nuanced in their style and so amazingly emotionally intelligent that they can spot all of these different things and work out how to create a perfect environment in that. And I think that's the real challenge, that we are not investing enough in leadership. We're not thinking about what leaders really need to be. And we've got Gen Ys who are opting out of leadership. And I don't blame them, because it's hard, right? It's really hard to be that for everyone. And some of them are just saying, I don't want to take on that stress. I don't want to have to do all of that, but I still want the pay, but I just definitely don't want to be a leader anymore.
Oh, that's so well articulated. Yeah, it's a myriad of challenges now. It really is. Where do the leaders that you've seen, how do they get that right?
I think there's whether you're hybrid, whether you're international, whether you're onshore, the leaders that get it right spend time in understanding their people deeply so that they can learn how to lead that person and get the best from them with them, right? I mean, a long time ago, when I used to go to job interviews, people would say, tell me what your leadership style is. And I'd say, well, if I've only got one, then my team's stuffed, right? Because I'm going to have 12 different people. And if I've only got one style, then, it's like a builder with a hammer and all they can see is a nail, right? So for me, and we've often promoted people that are the best tickers, I used to call them. They're the people who are best on the phones or best at able to reconcile the accounts or whatever it was, without really considering actually that's becomes almost secondary, yeah. And those people really need to be able to spot their person, see where they are, and leave them better having led them. And there's a great saying I love. It's something I try and remember, which is leaders listen others into existence.
Like it.
So, and so getting to know the person at a really deep level, understanding their motives and drivers. Also, I think there's a third piece, which as you're moving into this different generational overlay, they're speaking different languages. There's the Z pout and all of these sorts of things that you have to but also being able to really understand that the old way, the way you've done it in the past and all of those sorts of things won't necessarily work. So you have to learn from your people as much as they have to be led by you.
Jane, every time we have a guest on, they leave a question for the next. It's Stephen Bartlett does this with his Diver CEO.
Yeah.
We're not quite as big as Stephen Bartlett just yet.
Yeah.
But we had CEO of CyberRev, Adam Hewitt on, and he had a question around, in your mind, is it more important to love, to own your business and love the business, or is it more important to work with people that, professional people that you love working with?
I think it's, again, that's a bit contextual because I've never owned a business. I actually have, but I think it's more important for me to love the people I work with, right? And I think that I can point to certain experiences in my career where I go, God, I just felt like I was in flow in that job. I felt like I was just, everything was magic, and I didn't love the people necessarily, right? There are always people that you go, well, I'm probably not going to invite them around for dinner, but I respected them. We worked well together, and we were allied and rallying around a common purpose, and it felt like we were doing good work and we were achieving good things. So for me, I think because not everyone will have the privilege to be able to own their own business and love owning it. It's our job, and something I've taken really seriously, to make sure that we create an environment where leaders create an incredible experience for their people. And we have one of our purpose statements for our business is that we want to be the telco that people love, and in doing so, we'll change the game. Right? And if you think about it, love is a very hard bar to get to. So you can trust an organisation, but you might not love them.
Yep.
All right. So we know that we're the telco that people trust, but to be the telco that people love is actually another level of bar. And we don't say that customers love. That's not what we want to be. We don't want to be the telco that customers love. We want to be the telco that people love. So when I translate that into what my job is, I have to create a love of our people for Aussie so that they create a love for our customers of Aussie. And therefore, our shareholders and community will immediately love us because we'll get better returns, right?
Totally. And today, acquisitions and what have you, what is the current organisational size?
We're about 1,800 staff, including our offshore staff,
Yep.
and that'll grow with the acquisition of the AGL phone and internet business that we're taking on. And I don't think that any of my colleagues are any less ambitious. So I'm presuming that I will continue to be on the wild ride.
Jane, thank you so much for your story, for hearing about you personally, but also in business. I feel like I could chat with you another half an hour easily, but I know you're a busy lady. So is there a question that you might have for the next guest that we could ask?
Well, my question was, what is the question that you would have liked to have been asked that we haven't asked today?
For me?
Well, could be for you or for your next guest.
Well, I'd like to hear your answer to that question, actually.
I feel like I've been asked some good questions today.
You've answered them well.
I do think you haven't asked me what my next rock concert is, so that's one.
No, which you're going to tonight, by the way.
Well, yes, I am going to. I'm going to see a British sort of kind of punk rock group called Sleaford Mods tonight, and they're more my husband's favourite than mine. But
right.
But any excuse to go and watch some live music. I think. I feel like my question cup's been filled.
You've done well. And for anyone who wants advice on who's touring, any typical time of year for musical events, you're definitely the go-to.
Yeah.
If you want feedback on bands, Jane's your person. Jane, thank you so much.
Thanks. No problem at all. It's been fun.